We have our categories on the right hand side here, and we have our stories on the left hand side. So this is showing us true stories. Let's make it show us true data in this created by right here. So right now, this Ramon on June 30th, that's all hard-coded. Let's make it truly show the user that created it. If we go into our Submit Your Scary Story here, if we click on this button, it'll allow us to create a story without signing in. And we don't want that to happen. We want users to have to be signed in order for them to create a new story. So we'll go into our text editor, and let's go into our stories controller. And this is where we'll require them to be authenticated first, or to be logged in first. So type in before action authenticate user, and this is a devise method right here that devise provides for us. So it essentially just says that a user has to be logged in before an action is taken. In this case, we're going to say only for the new and create actions. If we do a refresh here and submit, try to go into it by clicking on the Submit Your Scary Story button, it's going to require us to log in. Go ahead and log in. And then now we're able to create a story. But before we do that, if we go into our edit profile, you'll see that we don't have anywhere in here that shows us our name. When we created the users table, or when Devise created the users table, you remember we added this field to it. And we don't have a users controller. So if we try to look for users controller, we don't have that because Devise provides all of that for us. And what we need to do is essentially what we do here down at the bottom, the story params, and put in a name to the user's controller. But because we don't have a user's controller, we need to do a bit of a workaround. And this is all documented in Devise's documentation. What we'll need to do is go into our application controller and define a method called add parameters to user. And Devise has a method here called Devise parameter sanitizer for their sign up, and then pass in the name. Let's create another one, and this is going to be called account update. So whenever we edit our profile, essentially what this is doing is it's allowing us to pass in a name parameter to Devise's users controller, our users controller, which Devise created for us again. And before we move on, we need to create a before action, add parameters to user if it's the Devise controller. Alright, now if we go into our registrations edit page here, which we're seeing in the application, when you click on edit profile, we need fields for a name. So I'm just going to copy the email fields here, paste it. Instead of email, it should be name. It should not be auto-focused. And this is a text field. Go back into our application, do a refresh, and there we have it. So now we have our name right here. So if we just type in here whatever name you want, in my case I'm going to call it Bob Green. Current password, you'll have to type in the current password in order to update. Click update, and now we are logged in as Bob Green. Click on the Submit Your Scary Story button again to create a new story, and before we do that, let's go into our stories controller. And one thing we did not do was tell the story who the user is. So at story.user equals the current user, and this current user method is another method provided by Devise, a very strong method that essentially says current user, it goes and fetch who the current user is, which is whoever you're logged in as. So when we create a new story, the user is going to be the current user. Do a refresh. Now let's create a new story. We'll just say walking at night and I was scared. Now create the story. Go back to our root page, our home page, and we can see walking at night and I was scared. And we want to change this right here. Now before we do that, these two stories, that was all old data. We didn't associate a user to a story yet, so we don't really have a user for these two stories right here. So let's get rid of it because it's old data and we don't need old data because it's not going to have a user associated to it. So we'll go to our Rails console, and you know what, let's just delete all of our stories for now. So story.all destroy. Oh, that didn't work. Stories equals story.all, stories.each do story, story.destroy, and there you go. It deleted all of our stories. Now if we do a refresh, there you have it. So all I essentially did was assign a variable of stories to story.all, and for each one of those stories call the destroy method, and that went through and destroyed all of our stories. Now we'll have to go through and create another story, but that's perfectly fine. Walking at night. There, now we have this here. Now we can change this from Ramon to the actual user, which is Bob that created this story. If we go into our index page here, this is where we'll be able to find Ramon, and we'll just say story.user.name and do a refresh, and there you have it. Bob Green, created by Bob Green on, and what date do we need to put in here? Well, if we look at our schema, we'll see our stories has a created at date. So this is the date that we'll want to use for this created on. And we can do that by just calling story.created at. And I'm just going to leave it at that for now, just so you can take a look and see what this looks like. You'll see that it put it in a UTC format, and this is not what we want. It doesn't look pretty, and it's just not nice. What we can do is at the end of this call strftime, and strftime is a Rails method that allows you to format your date time fields. So we'll say %b, %d, %y at %lowercase l, capital M, and %lowercase p. And so all of these % letters right here, you'll find it in the Rails documentation. All you have to do is just Google Rails strftime, and it'll show you what you can pass in as essentially parameters or arguments to retrieve the correct format, or retrieve whatever format you want for a date field. And so essentially this %b gives us June or July, and %lowercase d gives us the day. Let's take a look and see what this looks like. And because we have that, we don't need this at 1:30 p.m. Just delete that, go back to your application, do a refresh, and there you have it. Created on July 16th, 2015 at 3:36 a.m. And you can see here, this is what it's doing. %b, %d, that comma, and then the 2015 year. And I'm just going to make these all small because it's a little too big for where it's at right now. Do a refresh. There you go. It made it smaller. So I just wrapped it in small tags here so that it's smaller and doesn't take up so much space. So that's how we are able to associate a user to a story and requiring users to be logged in before they can submit a story.